Imagine the most feared warrior on the field suddenly losing the will to fight. Not after defeat, not after injury, not after betrayal, but in the final breath before history turns. That is the shock at the heart of the Mahabharata. Arjuna, the archer everyone trusted to help decide the war, looks at Kurukshetra and lowers his bow. This moment matters because Arjuna is not an ordinary soldier. He is disciplined, battle-tested, and trained for this exact duty. If even Arjuna stops here, then the problem is larger than fear. Something deeper has broken. A warrior is suddenly asking whether victory itself can become sinful when the people standing across from you are your own blood, your own teachers, your own world. That is why Arjuna's refusal is not weakness in the simple sense. It is the collision of two truths that both feel sacred. On one side stands justice, oath, and the need to answer ad dharma. On the other side stand affection, memory, reverence, and the unbearable fact that justice now demands violence against those who once shaped your life. Kurukshetra becomes not only a war, but a moral trap. And from that collapse comes one of the most important conversations in world literature. But before Krishna speaks, we have to understand why Arjuna breaks. What exactly does he see? What logic does he follow? And why does the Mahabharata treat his refusal not as an interruption to the story, but as the doorway through which its deepest teaching must enter? Arjuna asks Krishna to place the chariot between the armies so he can see who has gathered for war. That request seems practical at first. Then the disaster of recognition begins. He does not see faceless opponents. He sees Bhishma, the grandsire he reveres. He sees Drona, the teacher who trained his hands. He sees cousins, friends, in-laws, and men linked to his life through memory and obligation. This is the point many fast retellings miss. Arjuna is not refusing because he suddenly forgets Duryodhana's injustice. He remembers it. He knows why the war came. But moral clarity becomes harder when the cost is no longer abstract. He realizes that every arrow released here will travel not into strangers, but into the fabric of his own family. Even a righteous war can still feel like self-destruction. And the Mahabharata makes this intensely human. Arjuna's body reacts before philosophy fully forms. His limbs weaken. His mouth dries. His skin trembles. The great archer's internal balance starts collapsing in public. This is not a polished speech delivered from comfort. It is a nervous system under impossible strain, trying to protect the conscience from a deed it cannot yet bear. So Arjuna sits down in the chariot and refuses the momentum of war itself. That image is unforgettable because it captures a truth larger than the battlefield. Human beings can prepare for struggle, speak about justice, and still collapse when principle demands irreversible action. Arjuna's refusal begins there, in the terrible difference between knowing a duty and becoming the instrument that carries it out. Arjuna does not simply say, "I am afraid." He builds a case. First, he questions the value of the prize. What is a kingdom worth if those for whom you desire it must first be killed to obtain it? Victory, pleasure, and power begin to look empty when they are purchased through the destruction of the very relationships that give life meaning. Success starts tasting like ash before it arrives. Then he argues from reverence. How can he release arrows at Bhishma and Drona, men who deserve worship rather than slaughter? Even if they stand on the other side, they are not morally lightweight figures in his heart. The act of striking them feels like a violation of gratitude itself. Arjuna fears that a just cause may still force him into an inward sacrilege against his own formation. His argument then becomes civilizational. When families are destroyed, he says, inherited order collapses with them. Ritual memory weakens, social bonds decay, women are endangered, children inherit confusion, and the living lose their link to the dead. Arjuna is not speaking only as a brother now. He is speaking as someone who believes war can poison the moral ecosystem of an entire society for generations. So his refusal becomes sharper. Better, he says, to be killed unarmed than to become the killer of his own kin for the sake of rule. Notice how radical that is. Arjuna is willing to let history condemn him as passive rather than risk condemning himself as a destroyer of family and dharma. He would rather suffer loss than become unrecognizable to his own conscience. At this point we have to ask a harder question. Was Arjuna entirely right to refuse? The Mahabharata does not flatter him by saying every feeling he has is automatically pure. His compassion is real, but so is his attachment. His horror is real, but so is his confusion. The crisis is profound precisely because noble emotion and moral blindness can arrive together wearing the same face. Because if Arjuna walks away completely, what happens to the wrongs already committed? What happens to Draupadi's humiliation, the theft of the kingdom, the years of deception, the pattern of adharma that only grew because it was indulged? Refusal can be humane, but refusal can also abandon responsibility. Arjuna is torn not between violence and innocence, but between two terrible forms of consequence. That is why Arjuna's refusal should not be mocked, but neither should it be romanticized too quickly. He stops because he still has a conscience alive enough to feel the cost. Yet he also stops because he cannot see clearly through grief, relationship, and attachment. He knows enough to refuse blind action, but not enough yet to know what right action actually is. That is the hinge of the Gita. So Arjuna refused to fight because the war had become morally unbearable to him, but the epic now asks whether unbearable feeling is enough to define truth. Krishna's answer will not be a simple command to harden the heart. It will be a transformation of how action, duty, selfhood, and death are understood. Arjuna's breakdown is the necessary ground from which that transformation can begin. Krishna begins by attacking Arjuna's collapse at its root. He tells him that this despair does not suit him, not because feeling is dishonorable, but because Arjuna's understanding has become clouded. The self is deeper than the body. Death is not the end Arjuna imagines. And duty cannot be abandoned simply because its fulfillment is painful. Krishna is trying to separate compassion from paralysis. Then comes the harder lesson. Arjuna's problem is not only sorrow. It is attachment to outcomes, identities, and emotional ownership. Krishna calls him to act without clinging, to perform his dharma without making himself the ultimate controller of results. This does not make war pleasant. It makes disciplined action possible. The command is not feel nothing. The command is see more truly, then act from that truth. At its highest level, Krishna reveals that Arjuna is standing inside a reality larger than personal preference and fear. Time is already moving. Lives are already held inside a cosmic order beyond one man's trembling. Arjuna is not asked to invent dharma from emotion. He is asked to align himself with it. The battlefield becomes terrifying, but it also becomes intelligible in a new and more severe way. This is why Arjuna refused to fight, and this is why he eventually fights. He refused because he had not yet purified action from attachment and grief. He fights once he understands that true duty is not the same as personal appetite, revenge, or panic. The same battlefield remains. What changes is the clarity with which he enters it. The outer war stays brutal, but the inner collapse is answered. So why did Arjuna refuse to fight? Because he saw too much all at once. He saw love, reverence, kinship, death, social collapse, moral stain, and the emptiness of power separated from relationship. His conscience revolted before his philosophy matured. That refusal matters because it proves the Mahabharata does not celebrate violence blindly. It forces its greatest warrior to justify action before the soul can endure it. But his refusal is not the final answer either. The epic also teaches that feeling horrified is not enough if it leaves adharma unchallenged. Arjuna had to learn the difference between compassionate confusion and disciplined duty. That is why the scene still lives. It speaks to every moment when a human being knows that action is costly, inaction is costly, and the heart alone cannot untie the knot. Arjuna's refusal teaches a lasting lesson. A living conscience may stop you, but wisdom must then teach you how to move again. The Mahabharata honors the pause, examines the reasons, and then demands deeper clarity rather than easy escape. That is why this moment gave birth to the Bhagavad Gita. Without Arjuna's collapse, one of civilization's greatest teachings about action and self-mastery would never have been spoken. That is the final lesson of Arjuna's refusal. Do not ignore conscience, but do not let confusion rule your duty either. If this episode helped you see the Mahabharata more deeply, like this video, subscribe to EkalavyaLearn, and turn on the bell icon so you receive the next story on time. Arjuna lowered his bow because his heart was alive, and Krishna raised his vision before he raised it again.